Hello, my dear students and everyone watching this lecture. Today we are going to discuss about the Constitution of Japan. According to our syllabus, it is the third unit. The Constitution of Japan occupies one whole unit, but we will try to cover up the whole unit in one lecture. So obviously it will be very long. I hope you will understand me, because due to poor electricity and internet connection, we have missed few days in the past week. Plus, we are running out of time, so we will try to cover the whole unit in one lecture. Obviously, it will be very long, but I will try to be as brief as I can. In this lecture, we will begin with a brief introduction of the topic. Then we will point out some interesting facts and figures related with Japan. And then we will come to a brief history or background of Japan. Then we'll discuss about the Meiji Constitution, then the Showa Constitution, the executive branch, the legislative branch, the judiciary branch, and finally political parties in Japan. Now here you might be surprised why we have two constitutions, the Meiji Constitution and the Showa Constitution. The Meiji Constitution was adopted in 1889 and came into force in 1890. And the Showa Constitution was adopted in 1947. So the present constitution of Japan is that of Showa Constitution. Officially it is known as the Constitution of Japan, but it is also more popularly known as the Showa Constitution. And the Meiji Constitution is officially known as the Constitution of the Empire of Japan. Actually, we are supposed to focus more on Showa Constitution, but from time to time we will touch upon the Meiji Constitution because it is also equally important. Now let's begin with a brief introduction. Japan has a constitutional monarchy with parliamentary system of government. This is very similar with that of the United Kingdom. It is a unitary or centralist state. As in the case of UK, it is a unitary country or a centralist state. In other words, it is not a federal country like that of India or UK. The three branches of government under the Constitution of Japan or the Showa Constitution of 1947 are the legislature, the executive, the judiciary as usual, and the legislature is represented by the Diet. The Diet is the Parliament of Japan. It is bicameral, consisting of the House of Representatives and the House of Councillors. And the executive branch is comprises of the monarch or the emperor and the cabinet. The cabinet is again made up of the prime minister and his ministers of state. And the judiciary branch is represented by the Supreme Court and such other subordinate courts. Now let's come to the second point. Some interesting facts and figures. Japan has an area of 377,835 square kilometers, which is just 1/8 of India, meaning to say it is much smaller than India. Its capital is in Tokyo. Japan is made up of several islands and isles, as in the case of UK again. Largely, though it is a small country, it is mountainous with 80% forest cover area. Japan is a very earthquake-prone country or region, facing more than 1,500 earthquakes every year. It is located basically in the Far East or East Asia. In terms of population, the country has 127.8 million according to an estimate in 2011. 99% of the population are Japanese, and the remaining 1% belongs to different ethnic groups like Chinese, Korean, etc. Japan is largely a homogeneous society having common language, Japanese, common culture, and similar way of life. And the people of Japan are interestingly very patriotic. The feeling of nationalism is very high in Japan. In terms of religion, about 84% of the Japanese people are Buddhism and Shintoism. They are very related. Shintoism is nothing but worship of ancestors. And they have strong dislike for Christianity. And Japanese people are highly superstitious. Let me remind you one thing. During the Second World War, many of the Japanese soldiers were killed in Manipur during the Battle of Imphal and Kohima. So you will often heard about the Japanese people coming to Manipur to look for the remains of their loved ones. Since they are highly superstitious, they feel that those dead bodies left behind in Manipur or in other parts of the world during wartime might not be in peace. Their soul might not be in peace if the last rites are not properly done. In terms of economy, Japan is rich in natural resources. Of course, they don't have iron ore. One very common example is Japan has very little iron deposit, but they are very rich in natural resources. It is a highly industrialized economy. In other words, Japan is a very rich or economically developed country. 20% of the people depends on seafood, mainly fishery, and 40% depends on agriculture. Now, let's continue with the brief history or background of Japan. Here, the history or the background of Japan can be divided into three periods: pre-feudal age, feudal age or feudalism, and post-feudal period. And this post-feudal period is also the period of the Meiji rule, or the time when Meiji constitution was adopted. Now let's begin with the pre-feudal age. Like any other country, Japan was ruled by tribal chief in olden days. I mean, thousands of years ago. Legendary but non-verified accounts suggested in around 660 BC, Japan was founded by a descendant of the gods. And in some other account, it is said that it was Emperor Jimmu from the Yamato tribe who founded Japan. Before that, it was ruled by petty tribal chief. And for the first time, Japan as a unified state or country emerged around 660 BC by Emperor Jimmu. In other words, Jimmu was the first emperor of Japan. And this family, the Yamato tribe, ruled the country till about 645 AD. That means about 1000 years. During this time, a class system placed Tenno or the emperor and his family at the top, with nobles, commoners, and slaves underneath. Since this time, since 660 BC, the country has been ruled by an unbroken chain of emperors. These emperors continue to rule Japan even till now, though the present emperor is just reduced to symbol. Now, after the pre-feudal age comes the feudal age. This started around the 5th century AD, when influence of Chinese reached Japan. And Chinese feudal system has influenced Japan in such a way that feudalism started getting rooted in Japan. And apart from that, bureaucracy was also introduced, and Confucianism or Shintoism ideology had also become very popular in Japan. Now, during this period, or during the feudal period, the emperors, Tenno, centralized powers from the feudal lords. He himself became the chief priest and also the commander-in-chief of the armed forces. In around 1192, the samurai began to rule Japan under the head, the shogun, who used the Tenno as a figurehead. Now, since around 1192, the Tenno or the emperor become the figurehead, the nominal head, and the rear head belong to the samurai or the military groups under the leadership of the shogun or the military leader. The government system during this time was based on feudalism, with feudal lords retaining a strong autonomy in their territories. The samurai-controlled government continued through the middle of the 19th century. From the 11th or 12th century to the middle of 19th century, the rule of the samurai under the head of shogun continued. So around 1867, in the latter part of 19th century, Tokugawa Yoshinobu gave the sovereign power to the emperor. Now, from the 11th or 12th century till the middle of 19th century, it was a military group who ruled Japan. But in the latter part of 19th century, this military or shogun, assisted by the samurai, give back or surrender the sovereign power back to the emperor. And now, the emperor become once again the real ruler of Japan. And this happened mainly because of Western influence, particularly United States, Russia, and others. The shogunate, or the rule of the shogun, thereby gave way to the Meiji restoration of a centralized state, restoring the sovereign power to Tenno. Now, after the samurai group or the military group return the power or give back the power to the emperor, with this began the post-feudal period, because once again the emperor became the real ruler of Japan. Now, Japan had for long maintained its isolation from the outside world. They always remained isolated. They did not have any relationship with the outside world for a very, very long time. But they could no longer avoid the influence from Russia and USA. In 1867, as we had just discussed, power was returned to the emperor, which came to be known as the Meiji Restoration. Meiji Restoration is nothing but when the military rulers give back or return sovereign power to the emperor. The Meiji Constitution was adopted, modeled on the eras of German constitutional monarchy. The Tenno or the emperor possesses sovereign power, which the cabinet ministers were obliged to support. Now, the Tenno also had the power to issue imperial ordinances in an emergency and to proclaim martial law. The Meiji emperor then abolished the feudal system and appointed governors in every provinces. Class privileges were abolished and public offices opened to the common people. In 1868, the emperor issued a historic document called the Charter Bar, thereby introducing elements of westernization and deliberative assembly. Now, what happened with the Meiji Restoration, or after the military rulers returned power to the emperor, was that the emperor started changing a lot of things. Of course, he continued to be the sovereign power or the real ruler. And with the influence of Western civilization or westernization, class privileges were abolished and public offices or government jobs were open to the common people. In 1868, finally, the emperor issued a historic document called Charter Bar, which introduces elements of westernization and a deliberative assembly. Now, let's discuss the Meiji Constitution briefly. The Meiji Constitution. In 1881, this is actually still part of the post-feudal era. The government announced that a parliament will be convened and a constitution be granted by 1890. Accordingly, the Meiji Constitution was adopted in 1889. Now let's remember that during this period, since the Meiji Restoration, there has been protests from the people that power should be delegated to the people, or there has to be democratization of government authority. So, to appease the people, the government or the Meiji government finally announced in 1881 that a constitution be granted with a parliament in 1890. And accordingly, in 1889, a constitution was adopted, and in 1890, it came into force. Now, on February 11, 1889, the Constitution of the Empire of Japan, commonly known as the Meiji Constitution, was promulgated. The Meiji Constitution was nothing more than a second-hand version or an imitation of the German Constitution, with strong and extensive imperial power supported by a superficial constitutionalism. Now, during those days, the Constitution of USA was already there, the Constitution of France, the Constitution of UK was already there, but Japan had copied the German Constitution because German had a very, very strong center constitution, or the German Constitution gave very strong power to the center. So similarly, as they copied from the German Constitution, the Constitution of Japan or the Meiji Constitution also gave a very strong power to the central government, particularly the emperor. Now let's come to the salient features of the Meiji Constitution. First, the Constitution of Japan of 1889 or 1890, popularly known as the Meiji Constitution, was written and brief. The Meiji Constitution has only 76 articles divided into 7 parts. It is just about half of the Constitution of USA. Now, the Constitution of USA is considered to be one of the shortest constitutions still in use, but the Meiji Constitution was just half of the United States Constitution. Most of the articles has just 1 or 2 sentences. Second, imperial government. The Constitution laid a special emphasis on the institution of the emperor. It gives strong power, strong importance to the emperor, who is the source of all authority. He sanctions all laws, convene and dissolve the Diet, issue ordinances, and act as the executive head of the government. Third, fundamental rights. The Constitution provided limited fundamental rights and duties which are not violable. In other words, the Meiji Constitution gives certain fundamental rights and duties, but these rights are limited by various means. For example, the government can at any time suspend those rights if it feels necessary. Moreover, the courts did not have the power of judicial review. So, though there were fundamental rights under the Meiji Constitution, it was limited. Bicameral legislature. The Diet, or the Parliament of Japan under the Meiji Constitution, has a bicameral legislature, having the House of Peers with 400 members and House of Representatives with 450 members. Under the Showa Constitution, the upper house is known as House of Councillors, but under the Meiji Constitution, the upper house is called House of Peers. Now, the House of Peers, which has 400 members belonging to the nobility class and higher ranks of the society, is basically a hereditary based house. Most of the members, about 90% of the members, are hereditary members. They become a member of the House of Peers by virtue of being a nobility class or a higher rank in the society. On the other hand, the House of Representatives is a popular house elected by the people. Under the Constitution of Japan of 1889, voters must be minimum 25 years, only mayor, women are not allowed, and should be paying at least 15 yen as direct taxes annually in the past 10 years. Meaning to say, voting right is given only to rich male citizens. If you don't pay 15 yen as direct taxes annually in the past 10 years, you cannot vote, even though if you are male and 25 years. Now, next point. The Constitution of Japan, or the Meiji Constitution, has a privy council of 26 members who are drawn from businessmen, diplomats, generals, admirals, and men of distinctions. Ministers of state, all the cabinet members are the ex officio members of the privy council. This privy council was meant to deliberate on all important matters. Now the cabinet. The constitution is silent about the cabinet, but mentioned that the ministers will give advice to the emperor and shall be responsible for it. The government should have a cabinet headed by a prime minister, and this cabinet from time to time gives advice to the emperor, but their advice is not bound on the emperor. The emperor will listen, and if he want to follow, he will follow. If not, he can reject the advice of the cabinet, because the emperor continued to be very strong, and the cabinet was a much weaker cabinet. The emperor appoints the prime minister on the advice of the privy council, and then other ministers on the advice of the prime minister. The emperor can remove a minister on the ground of incapacity. Since the emperor retained a very strong power, he can remove a minister anytime he liked, if he feels that he is incapable of holding the post. Now, the other features of the Meiji Constitution is that it is a rigid constitution. In 48 years of its existence, the Meiji Constitution was never amended because it has a very difficult amending procedure. For example, proposal for amendment of the Constitution can be submitted only by an imperial order. The Diet, the House of Peers, and the House of Representatives cannot simply introduce amendment bill. It should come from the emperor. And such proposal coming from the emperor will be discussed and passed by 2/3 majority in the Diet. Only then a constitution can be amended. But During its existence for 48 years, the constitution was never amended. In short, the constitution was very rigid. Now let's come to the Showa constitution. The Meiji constitution remains from November 1890 to May 1947. So in May 1947, the Showa constitution came into force. The Showa constitution was practically prepared by the Allied headquarters. In theory, it was prepared by the government of Japan, but in practice or in reality, it was actually prepared by the Allied headquarters headed by General Douglas MacArthur. So it is also known as a constitution forced upon the people of Japan by General MacArthur. It may be recalled that after Japan was defeated in the Second World War, especially after atom bomb was dropped in the city of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, Japan accepted the Potsdam Declaration to end the war, and the Allied forces, predominantly the Americans, was authorized to occupy Japan until it had created a peaceful and responsible government that obeyed the freely expressed will of the Japanese people. This means that after Japan was defeated in the Second World War, the Allied forces headed by General MacArthur occupied Japan, and their duty was to remain in Japan until and unless a responsible democratic government was established in Japan. Now, till that time, Japan was an empire. In other words, Japan was a country ruled by emperor. So, United States and other Allied powers were scared that if they don't establish a democratic country, since Japanese people are very patriotic and very nationalistic, they might prepare for war again. So, since they don't want another world war coming up, they want Japan to have not only a democratic government, but also a very weak military system. That was why Allied forces headed by General MacArthur was sent to Japan to prepare for a new government. Initially, when General MacArthur asked the Prime Minister of Japan, Mr. Shidehara, to prepare a new constitution, the Prime Minister said that there is no need of a new constitution as the Meiji constitution can be amended to suit the changed condition. The Prime Minister first opined that they don't need a new constitution, they already have the Meiji constitution, and that Meiji constitution can be amended to suit the changing scenario. But when he said that, General MacArthur mocked at him, rebuked him, and somehow forced him to prepare a new constitution. So the Prime Minister of Japan reluctantly made his cabinet ministers and started preparing for a new constitution. And when the first draft of the constitution was submitted to the Allied forces, it was not accepted. So the Allied forces, headed by General MacArthur, made lot of amendments or lot of changes and give it back to the government of Japan. And having no other option as a defeated country in the Second World War, they accepted all the changes or amendment made by the Allied forces. So the constitution was passed on November 3, 1946 and came into force on May 3, 1947. Following the passage of the constitution, the American occupation or the occupation of the Allied powers ended in 1952. Now, under this new constitution, Japan was made a centralist state or a unitary state with 47 prefectures and some 3,000 cities. The constitution provides for local government autonomy, and its prefecture and city has its own legislature and administration. Now let's come to the main features of the Showa constitution. First, it is a written constitution. The Constitution of Japan consists of 103 articles in 11 chapters. It derived much of the British and American Constitution. Let us remember that the Constitution of the Empire of Japan of 1890 had borrowed mainly from the German Constitution. But the Constitution of Japan of 1947 borrowed mainly from the British and American Constitution. Second, and a very unique feature of the Constitution of Japan was renunciation of war. The Constitution of Japan declares that the country will not go for war again. It will also avoid force or threat of use of force to settle international disputes. They cannot go for war and they cannot use force to settle international disputes. Apart from that, this is the most peculiar article of the Constitution of Japan. Article 9 of the Constitution of Japan declares that the Japanese people renounce war forever. Moreover, Japan will never maintain land, sea, and air forces. In other words, they will not have any military forces or any other war potential materials. Third, sovereignty of the people or popular sovereignty. The Constitution wastes sovereignty with the people. In the earlier Constitution, the sovereign power lies with the emperor, but now it is given to the people. The emperor can perform acts of state. The emperor can perform some ceremonial act in the name of the state, but has no power related to the government. All the government powers or real powers are controlled by the Prime Minister and his ministers of states. The emperor is being reduced to a symbol of the state and unity of the people. He don't have any real power anymore. Rigid constitution. As in the previous constitution, the Constitution of Japan of 1947 was also very rigid. Till now, though it has been more than 6 decades, the Constitution has never been amended. Now, slightly different from the previous Constitution, the Constitution can be amended only if it is approved by the Diet by 2/3 votes of all members of its house. After it is being passed, an amendment bill is passed in the Diet, that is the House of Councillors and the House of Representatives, by 2/3 majority, it will be sent to the people for a national referendum. Then, if majority of the people approve again, then the emperor, all the tenno, will promulgate the amendment in the name of the Japanese people. Now, let me repeat again. To amend the constitution, it has to be passed by both houses of the parliament, all the Diet. Then it will be sent to the people for approval. And if the people approve it, then the emperor will declare it as amended. Limited monarchy. The constitution establishes a limited monarchy with the emperor as a mere constitutional head. The Japanese constitution had established constitutional monarchy, all the rule of one person, but in real sense, he has no real power, or his power are just in the namesake or symbolic or ceremonial. All the acts of the emperor are performed on behalf of the people with the advice of the cabinet. The emperor has to act only according to the advice of the cabinet. Parliamentary government. Though the country has a constitutional monarchy, it also follows a parliamentary government. The Diet, or the parliament, is the highest organ of the state and the sole legislative or law-making body. The Prime Minister and his cabinet colleagues come from the Diet and are responsible to it. Unitary government. Now, the Constitution of Japan is unitary in structure as in UK. The provinces, all the state governments, exercises only those powers vested upon by the central government. There is no division of power. So if the local government or the provincial government has to exercise certain powers, it has to exercise only those powers which are transferred or delegated by the central government. In other words, there is no provisions of division of powers between the center and the provinces, as in the case of India or United States. Bicameral legislature. The Diet, or the parliament, has two chambers, or bicameral legislature. The House of Councillors and the House of Representatives. The House of Councillors has 242 members who are elected for 6 years, and the House of Representatives have 480 members who are elected for 4 years. In between these two, the House of Representatives is more powerful than the House of Councillors. Fundamental rights. The Constitution enumerates various rights granted to the people of Japan or to the citizen of Japan. The judiciary is given the power to protect these rights. In the previous constitution, the judiciary has no right of judicial review, but now they have judicial review power. So the judiciary is empowered to protect the rights of the people. Apart from these rights, certain fundamental duties are also enumerated in the constitution, like the duty to pay taxes, etc. 10. Independent judiciary. The Supreme Court, which is the judiciary branch of the government, is independent of the legislature and executive. The executive cannot remove the judges, but only through impeachment. Since the judiciary branch is independent of the executive and legislature, the executive or the legislature cannot simply remove the judges. Even if they have to remove, it should be only through proper impeachment procedure. In other words, the Supreme Court has the power to declare any law or executive order unconstitutional if it violates the spirit of the Constitution. This simply means that the judiciary or the Supreme Court is empowered with the power of judicial review. Adult suffrage. The Constitution provides universal adult suffrage to all the citizens who are 20 years and above. There is no restriction based on sex, property, or any other special conditions provided by the Meiji Constitution. Now, under the Meiji Constitution, a voter should be minimum 25 years. He should be a male. No woman is allowed to vote. And plus, he should be paying regular taxes, direct taxes of at least 15 yen in the past 10 years. Meaning to say, if you are not from a well-to-do family, and if you are not a man, you cannot, you don't possess the right to vote. But under the Showa Constitution, there is universal adult suffrage, meaning to say, all citizens above the age of 20 years can vote. Next, Supreme Law. The Constitution is the supreme law of the land according to the Showa Constitution. Every citizen, irrespective of position, whether you are in a higher position or lower position, you are obliged to respect and uphold the Constitution. Now 13. The Constitution does not specify any clause of the Constitution as unchangeable. There is no mention in the constitution that this or that particular clause or article should not be changed. However, there is a strong argument that certain fundamental principles that constitute the essential identity of the constitution cannot be amended. Certain things should not be affected in the constitution, which are the basic structure of the constitution. These principles would include popular sovereignty, renunciation of war, guarantees of human rights, the rule of law, and separation of powers. These are some of the main features of the Constitution of Japan of 1947, popularly known as the Showa Constitution. Now, let's discuss about the executive under the Showa Constitution. When we talk about the executive under the Constitution of Japan, it simply means the emperor or the monarch and the cabinet. The emperor and the cabinet collectively form the executive branch of the government. In the case of India, it is the president and the council of ministers who form the executive branch. Similarly, in the context of Japan, it is the emperor and the cabinet that form the executive branch of the government. However, here, the emperor is just the symbol. He performs only ceremonial functions, and all the real power lies with the cabinet. And the cabinet consists of the prime minister as the head or as the master and his ministers of state. Now let us look at the emperor and the cabinet, and after that the prime minister one after another. Now let's begin with the emperor. Monarchy is the oldest institution in Japan. It began in the 7th century BC. The emperor has been and is still the living symbol of the nation's history, heritage, and achievements. His person was considered sacred and inviolable. In other words, the institution of emperor is highly respected in Japan. It is said that most of the Japanese people still pray every day, turning towards the side of the throne of the emperor. They consider the institution as sacred and inviolate. In short, it is being highly respected in Japan. The Constitution of Japan recognizes the nominal position of the emperor. Under the Constitution of 1890, the emperor was given a very important position. But under the Constitution of 1947, he is given only a nominal position and a constitutional recognition. Actually, MacArthur, the Allied forces were not in favor of including the office of emperor, but since they know the sentiment of the people, they somehow included with nominal power. Sovereignty in the previous constitution belonged to the emperor, but now it belongs to the people. And the emperor is the constitutional head of the state and legalized figurehead. Succession to the throne. For instance, if the emperor is dead, who will succeed him? The imperial throne shall be dynastic. That means the successor should always come from the same family and be succeeded in accordance with the imperial house law enacted by the Dai. Primogeniture, male line counted from the father to son, is the rule with succession running through the main line and no adoption is permitted. If there is no member of the imperial family in the main line of succession, the throne is passed to the imperial family next nearest in lineage. It cannot be given to another family. It has to be from the same family. If from a particular family there is no male heir or no one to succeed the throne, it should be given to the next of kin. In other words, no other blood can become the emperor of Japan. It has to be from that particular family only. Powers of the emperor. The constitution declares that the emperor shall be the symbol of the state and shall derive his power from the people. The emperor shall perform all his acts on the advice and approval of the cabinet. The powers of the emperor can be categorized as executive power, legislative powers, and judicial powers. Now, the office of emperor is being recognized in the constitution. He is the symbol of the state and derive all his power from the people, meaning to say, whatever he did, he have to do in the name of the people, but in reality, he has to accept the advice of the cabinet. All his actions, activities shall be on the advice and approval of the cabinet. He has so many power, so many executive power, legislative power, and judicial power, but all these powers are as per the advice and approval of the cabinet only. Now let's begin with the executive powers of the emperor. Now the emperor appoints the prime minister designated by the Diet. For instance, after the general election, after the election to the House of Representatives, the Diet, that means both houses of the parliament, will elect a prime minister. And after the election process is completed, the emperor will simply give his signature or give his formal appointment order. He cannot appoint anybody as he likes. He has to appoint only that person elected by the parliament or the Diet. And again, he has to attest appointment and dismissals of the ministers. For example, if a particular person is appointed as a minister or dismissed from his post, the emperor has to give his signature. Similarly, he has to also attest powers and credentials of the ambassadors and ministers. All the credentials of the ambassadors or diplomats and ministers should be attested by the emperor. But all these things has to be done with the aid and advice of the prime minister or cabinet only. He also attests instruments of ratifications and diplomatic documents. I mean, those documents signed between Japan and foreign countries or other countries should be attested by the emperor. He received foreign ambassadors and diplomats in the name of the people of Japan. Now let's come to the legislative powers. He promulgated all national laws, constitutional amendments, executive orders, and treaties. Now, all laws, amendments, executive orders, and treaties are issued in the name of the emperor. He convenes sessions of the parliament or the Diet. And at the same time, he also dissolved the House of Representatives if the Prime Minister or the Cabinet advise him to do so. He also issues proclamation of general election to the Diet. That also is advised by the Prime Minister and his Cabinet. Now, judicial powers. When we talk about the judicial power of the emperor, it has something to do with attest amnesty, commutation of punishment, reprieve, and restoration of rights. For example, if a particular convict or criminal is to be forgiven or his punishment reduced or his rights restored, then it should be done by the emperor with the advice of the Prime Minister and Cabinet. He also appoints the Chief Judge of the Supreme Court, again as designated by the Cabinet. He has so much of power, but all these powers are exercised only with the advice and approval of the Cabinet. Now let's come to the Cabinet, the real executive branch of the government. The first cabinet of Japan was formed in 1885 by an imperial ordinance. I mean, this was the time when there has been Western influence in Japan, and many people started demanding for responsible government. So to appease the people, the protesting intellectuals, the Meiji restoration or the Meiji government introduced cabinet system. Under the Meiji constitution again in 1889 or 1890, the prime minister was appointed by the emperor. Even now, the prime minister is appointed by the emperor, but the situation is different. Now, he has to appoint only that person elected by the Diet. But those days, the emperor has the power to appoint anybody as the prime minister, because the real sovereign authority or sovereign power lies with the emperor during the Meiji period. The new constitution of 1947 explicitly recognizes cabinet system of government, vesting the executive power in the cabinet. The cabinet is organized on parliamentary lines under the leadership of the prime minister. Now, under the constitution of 1947, cabinet system of or cabinet form of government is clearly recognized. Under the Meiji constitution, cabinet was not mentioned. But now, in the present constitution, it is being mentioned clearly. And this cabinet system is organized on parliamentary lines, as in the case of UK or India. The cabinet consists of the prime minister and the minister of state, who are appointed by the prime minister. The total number of cabinet members must be less than 17. And majority of them must be chosen from among the members of the Diet. A person who is not a member of the Diet can also become cabinet member, but most of them should be from the Diet. And the prime minister and other minister of state must be civilian. Executive power belongs to the cabinet, although it is collectively responsible to the Diet. The cabinet therefore must either resign en masse or dissolve the House of Representatives when the House of Representatives pass a no-confidence resolution. Since most of the cabinet members are derived from the Diet, particularly from the House of Representatives, and since the cabinet members are collectively responsible to the House of Representatives, in case a no-confidence motion is being passed in the House of Representatives, the cabinet should collectively resign or should dissolve the House of Representatives. They don't have any other option. The cabinet exercises its power through cabinet meetings, which are regularly held on Tuesday and Friday mornings. Every week they have to have meeting on Tuesday and Friday, but sometimes extraordinary meetings is also held occasionally. Now, let's come to the functions of the cabinet. First, the cabinet takes important political decisions and formulates the policy of the government. All important political decisions and policies are framed by the cabinet. It submits bills and annual fiscal budget to the Diet. It manages foreign affairs, negotiations, and also concludes treaties with foreign countries. The cabinet also submits reports on national affairs and foreign relations to the Diet. Fifth, it issues cabinet orders to execute the provisions of the Constitution. 6. It exercises control and supervision over various administrative branches of the government. And 7. It advises the emperor to dissolve the House of Representatives and convocation of the Diet. These are some of the functions of the cabinet. Now, let's continue. It administers the law faithfully and conduct affairs of the state. The cabinet prepares regular reports on the state of national finances to the Diet, to the parliament, and to the people. It submits final accounts of expenditure and revenues along with the statement of audit prepared by the Board of Audit to the Diet, and also to the people. Again, it decides on general amnesty, special amnesty, and commutation of punishment, reprieve, and restorations of rights. This power is given to the cabinet, but once it is decided, it has to be done in the name of the emperor. The emperor should have the ceremonial authority to declare that it is done, though decisions are taken by the cabinet. The cabinet also designates chief judge of the Supreme Court and appoints all other judges. The ceremonial appointment is in the hands of the emperor again. It makes payments for enforcing deficiencies from the reserve fund of the budget and gets subsequent approval of the Dai. It advises for the proclamation of the general election of the members of the Dai. It affixes signatures on all laws and cabinet orders. It convokes the House of Councillors in emergency session when the House of Representatives has been dissolved. Now these are some of the main functions of the cabinet. I have given around 16 points and I hope you can remember at least some of them. Now let's come to the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister is the nerve center and head of the cabinet. He is the master of the cabinet, or he is the leader of the cabinet. The Prime Minister is not just the choice of the majority, but is elected by the whole house. That is, both houses of the Diet separately soon after the election of the Diet. Now, as soon as election to the House of Representatives is being completed, the Diet, or both houses of the Diet, has to elect a Prime Minister. Now, for example, the two houses choose different person. There is no agreement between the two. Then, to solve that kind of deadlock, a joint committee should be formed by both houses of the Diet. And again, if that joint committee could not solve the deadlock, could not bring to an amicable solution, then finally the opinion of the House of Representatives will prevail and the one chosen by the House of Representatives will become the Prime Minister. After the election of the Prime Minister in the Diet, the Emperor issues formal appointment letter to the person so elected. Now, functions of the Prime Minister. First, after his appointment or soon after his appointment, the Prime Minister constitutes the government by completing the list of ministers to be presented to the Emperor. As soon as he is elected by the Diet, the Prime Minister will be formally appointed by the Emperor. Then as soon as this appointment is being done, he should constitute his cabinet colleagues. He has the power to appoint and also to remove and reshuffle his ministers according to his wishes. The Prime Minister can change his cabinet minister anytime. He is the chairman of the cabinet and has the right to supervise the work of the ministers. He is the leader of the Diet in general and the House of Representatives in particular, making all important announcements. He makes appointment to all important offices by consulting his cabinet colleagues, but his choice is final. Whenever he is going to make some appointment or important decisions, he can always seek the advice of his cabinet, but his opinion or his choice always remain final. All laws and cabinet orders are signed by the Prime Minister and countersigned by the relevant minister. For example, if it is from the road transport department, it should be signed by the Prime Minister plus the road and transport minister. That means all laws or cabinet orders are countersigned by the Prime Minister. He also fixes the dates for the elections of the Diet and its sessions. As I've already said, he can always take the advice of the cabinet, but his opinion is final. He concludes international treaties. And again, He also gives necessary approval if any legal action is to be taken against ministers during his or her tenure of office. No legal action can be taken against a minister without the consent of the Prime Minister. Now, as the head of the cabinet and as the cabinet has a collective responsibility, none of the cabinet ministers can be tried or legal action can be taken against any ministers until and unless the Prime Minister gave permission based on court order. During debates in the parliament or diet, he can intervene to help or rescue his cabinet colleagues if they are not performing well in the debate. Now, position of the Prime Minister. First, as a boss of the cabinet, the Prime Minister, as we have just discussed, is the head, or the boss, or the master of the cabinet. He appoints, he dismisses, and he reshuffles his ministers as he likes. He presides over cabinet meetings, and he helps settle disputes arising between different departments. He protects and assists his cabinet colleagues, and he submits bills, reports, and general national affairs and foreign affairs to the Diet. Second, as the leader of the Diet, he is not just the leader or the boss of the cabinet, but he is also the leader of the Diet. That means the whole parliament, particularly the House of Representatives. The Prime Minister is elected by the Diet and can hold office so long as he holds the confidence of the House of Representatives. Once the House of Representatives says you are no longer capable and pass a no confidence motion, then the Prime Minister has to resign. But he can remain in office as long as he enjoys the confidence of the House of Representatives. And again, as the leader of the Diet, he guides or he leads the proceedings of the House and makes important announcements. He provides life and leadership to the Diet. He submits reports to the Diet on national and foreign matters, as we have just discussed. Now again, he was a leader or the boss of the cabinet, then the leader of the Diet, and finally he is also the leader of the nation. The Prime Minister is the leader and representative of the nation, and he usually represented the country in international arenas. He acts as the link between the emperor and the people. In fact, he is the most powerful executive officer and wielder of the authority of the emperor. Now, we have just come to the conclusion of the executive branch. Now we will come to the legislative branch, or the Diet, or the parliament. When we talk about the legislature or the Diet, Japan is the first country to have parliamentary form of government in Asia. Inspired by the Congress of USA in a visit by a team in 1860, a Senate was established in 1874. Here, let's remember, around 1860, a team of Japanese officers visited USA and observed the lawmaking procedure of the Congress of United States. And these officials who visited United States in 1860 were so impressed with the kind of legislative procedures that the American Congress have. So when they come back, they started protesting, they started demanding from the government that similar institutions should be established. So finally, a Senate or a deliberative assembly was established in 1874. However, this establishment of Senate in 1874 did not please the people. So the Meiji Emperor or the Meiji government in 1881 promised that a parliament will be convened in 1890, and then a constitution will be adopted. So as promised, the Constitution of the Empire of Japan, or the Meiji Constitution, was promulgated in 1889, providing a bicameral legislature. Now, let us look at the kind of diet that the Meiji Constitution established in 1889 or 1890. We will be moving very quick because after this we will be coming to the diet under the Showa Constitution or the Constitution of Japan of 1947 again. Now let us first discuss the diet under the Meiji Constitution of 1889. The Meiji Constitution provides for a bicameral legislature called the Diet. The Diet is the legislative branch and it is bicameral. The Emperor appoints the Prime Minister and other ministers on the recommendation of the Prime Minister and are responsible to him. At present, under the Showa Constitution, the Cabinet is responsible to the House of Representatives, but under the Meiji Constitution, the Prime Minister and the Cabinet is responsible to the Emperor. The Emperor can extend or reduce the term of the Parliament. The Parliament meets once in a year for 3 months, but there can also be special session. The two houses of the Diet are the House of Peers and the House of Representatives. Now, the House of Peers. The House of Peers is the upper chamber of the Diet with 416 members. About 90% of the members are drawn from hereditary peers or nobility class or people with high ranking in the society. The term of the members of the House was 7 years. Now, the House of Representatives under the Meiji Constitution. The House of Representatives, or the lower chamber of the Diet, contain 450 members. The House of Peers has 416 members and the House of Representatives has 450 members. Whereas the House of Peers is hereditary, the House of Representatives members are elected by the people. The term for the members of the House of Representatives was 4 years. Let's remember, for the House of Peers it was 7 years. The minimum age for the members was fixed at 30. A man was entitled to vote if he is 25 years of age or above and had paid 15 yen annually in direct taxes. Women were not allowed to vote. Now, let's come to the Diet under the Showa Constitution. The Diet under the Showa Constitution, also known as the Showa Constitution of 1947, establishes a very powerful central legislature called the Diet. And the Constitution also reduces the Emperor to a mere symbol of the nation. The Japanese Constitution defines the Diet as the highest organ of the state power with the sole law-making power and the authority to designate the Prime Minister. Earlier it was appointed by the Emperor, but now the Diet itself elected the Prime Minister. The Diet also has the power to approve international treaties, to determine the budget, to conduct investigations of the government, and to set up an impeachment court from among the members of both houses for the purpose of trying judges against whom removal proceedings have been instituted. In short, under the Constitution of 1947, the Prime Minister and the Cabinet has been empowered, and particularly the Diet or the Parliament has been made a very, very strong organ of the state power. In other words, it is the highest organ of the state with the sole law-making power authority. It has so much of power. In other words, the government became Diet center instead of Emperor center under the previous constitution. Under the Meiji Constitution, power was Emperor center. But under the Showa constitution, the government power became Diet center. The Diet or the parliament become the highest authority in the country. The Diet of Japan under Showa constitution has two chambers, the House of Councillors and the House of Representatives. Under the Meiji constitution we have the House of Peers, but now we have House of Councillors. The name of the House of Representatives is the same. Now let's discuss the House of Councillors first. The House of Councillors is the upper chamber or second chamber of the Diet. It consists of 262 members, unlike the House of Peers, which was hereditary. Now it is elected by by the people. Out of 242 members, 152 are elected on geographical basis from the 46 electoral districts and the corresponding prefectures. Every man and woman who are 20 years or above has the right to vote. Tenure of the House of Councillors. The members of the House of Councillors are elected for 6 years. Under the Meiji Constitution, the House of Peer members are elected for or appointed for 7 years. But here it is 6 years. And election for half of the members shall take place every 3 years. Half of the members will be elected every after 3 years. That means the house is a permanent house and it cannot be dissolved. The House of Councillors cannot be dissolved like the House of Representatives. Qualifications. To become a member of the House, a person must be first a citizen of Japan, not less than 30 years, and resident of the district for 3 months continuously. He must not have been adjudged mentally incompetent or convicted of serious crime. He must not hold any office of profit under the government of Japan. He must not have been adjudged and insolvent. He must not have been deprived of the membership by an act of the Diet, and no person shall be a member of both houses of the Diet. These are some of the qualifications to become a member of the House of Councillors. Let us remember that for the House of Representatives, only the age should come down to 25 and the rest will remain the same. Quorum. Quorum for a meeting of the House of Councillors is 1/3. That means if at least 1/3 of the members are not present, then there cannot be any official session of the House. The President or presiding officer of the House of Councillors. The presiding officer of the House is called the President or Gicho. He is elected by the House at the beginning of the session by secret ballot, along with a Vice President. In the first session of the House, the President and the Vice President shall be elected by the members. Now, functions of the House of Councillors can be divided into legislative functions, executive functions, financial functions, judicial functions, electoral functions, and constituent functions. Now let's remember here that as compared to the House of Representatives, the House of Councillors is a much weaker house. Though it is a permanent house, it is much weaker than the more popular house called the House of Representatives. But we shall see some of the powers accordingly. First, legislative functions. In terms of lawmaking, the House of Councillors has more or less the same power with the House of Representatives. For example, bill can be introduced in both of the houses except money bills and budgets. So, first, to pass a bill, it has to be passed by both houses separately. In case of disagreement between the two houses, there has to be joint committee, and if the joint committee cannot resolve the deadlock, the opinion of the House of Representatives will be considered. The House of Councillor doesn't have much power except that it can delay a bill for a period of 2 months or 60 days. Executive functions. Again, most of the executive functions are controlled by the cabinet, and these cabinet members can be drawn from both houses of the Dai. However, most of the cabinet members are usually drawn from the House of Representatives, so obviously the House of Representatives has more influence. According to the Constitution, the cabinet is responsible to the Dai, but in reality, it is responsible to the House of Representatives only. Only the House of Representatives can pass a motion of no confidence. These powers are not with the House of Councillors. In other words, the House of Councillors has no control over the cabinet, but it has the right to put questions, it can seek information, and it can ask the government to follow certain policies. But whether it should follow or not, he cannot force. The House of Councillors cannot force the cabinet to follow certain advice or opinions. The House of Councillors can also appoint investigation committee to probe any matter related with the government. Now, financial functions. When it comes to financial functions or financial powers, the power of the House of Councillor is much reduced, because all money bills can be introduced only in the House of Representatives. Once the House of Representatives passed the bill, it should be sent to the House of Councillor. If the House of Councillor made an amendment or changes or reject the bill, and in case a kind of deadlock emerges, as we have already discussed, there has to be a joint committee, and if the joint committee could not resolve the issue, then the opinion of the House of Representatives will prevail. However, the House of Councillor can delay money bills for 30 days. Only 30 days. For ordinary bill, it can delay for 60 days, but in the case of money bill, it can delay for only 30 days. Judicial functions. With regards to judicial matters, the two houses possess identical powers, or more or less the same powers. The House of Councillors, along with the House of Representatives, constitute the Court of Impeachment for the judges of the Supreme Court. An impeachment court shall have 14 members drawn equally from its house. Similarly, for an indictment committee also, the members should be shared equally by both the houses. About electoral functions, both the Houses of Councillors and the House of Representatives take part in the election of the Prime Minister. As soon as general elections are concluded, both the houses has to choose their Prime Minister. And again, if there are differences, a joint committee should be there, and if joint committee could not solve the deadlock, the opinion or decisions of the House of Representatives shall prevail even in the case of the Prime Minister election. Apart from that, the House of Councillors also elects its President, Vice President, Chairman of the Standing Committee, and other officials. Constituent functions. In other words, as far as amendment to the Constitution is concerned, the House of Councillors has more or less equal power with the House of Representatives. A proposal for the amendment to the Constitution can be introduced in either house of the Dai. That means the House of Councillors and the House of Representatives both can introduce an amendment proposal. Such proposals must be passed by 2/3 majority of all the members of each house separately. If it is passed by both houses, then it will be sent to the people for referendum. And again, if the people approve by a majority vote, it will become part of the Constitution after the Emperor formally recognizes it. Now let's come to the House of Representatives, or the lower chamber. The House of Representatives is the popular chamber or lower house of the Dai. It has 480 seats. Originally, under the Meiji constitution, the house had 300 members and later 466 members. But forget about this point. At present, it has 480 seats. The members are elected directly by the people. For the purpose of election, the prefectures are divided into 1 to 5 electoral districts, with Tokyo having 7 electoral districts. Each electoral district sends 3 to 6 representatives. Now, qualification, as I said, is more or less the same with that of the House of Councillors. Only the year will come down to 25 years. Tenure of the House is 4 years unless it is dissolved. The House can be dissolved, but if it is not dissolved, normally the members are elected for 4 years. In case the House is dissolved, its election should be held within 40 days. And the first session of the House must be held within 30 days of the election. The Speaker. The presiding officer of the House of Representatives is called the Gicho, or the Speaker. In the case of the House of Councillors, it is the President. Here it is the Speaker. He is elected by the House at the beginning of the session by secret ballot. Apart from the Speaker, the House also elect a Deputy Speaker, Chairman of the Standing Committee, Secretary General, and other officials. Functions of the House of Representatives. These are more or less the same with the House of Councillors, except that the House of Representatives is more powerful, especially in cases of financial matters. However, in other matters, it is more or less the same. First, in terms of legislative functions or lawmaking, the two houses has more or less equal power. Any bill can be introduced in both houses, and it should be passed by both houses separately first, then it should be sent to the other house. In case of deadlock, as we have already discussed, there has to be a joint committee, and if joint committee could not resolve the deadlock, then the opinion of the House of Representatives will prevail. The House of Councillors, as we have already said, can delay for 60 days only. Executive functions. Since most of the cabinet members are drawn from the House of Representatives, and since the cabinet is collectively responsible to the House of Representatives, the House of Representatives is obviously more powerful or more influential in the case of executive functions. However, there are also many other executive functions which the two houses collectively took decision. I mean, both the two houses are equally responsible for certain acts, like ratification of treaties and ratification of appointment of officers by the cabinet and such other things. In other words, the Dai gives approval to treaties, not only the House of Representatives but both the houses. When it comes to financial matters, the House of Representatives is much more powerful. First, budget should be introduced only in the House of Representatives. So, in other words, the House of Representatives has full control over the purse of the nation. No new taxes can be levied, or existing taxes can be changed without the consent of the House of Representatives. In other words, all money matters, financial matters are controlled by the House of Representatives. When it comes to judicial functions, it is more or less the same with the House of Councillors. The House of Representatives, along with the House of Councillors, form the final code of impeachment for the judges of the Supreme Court. An impeachment court shall have 14 members, 7 from its house. Indictment committee also has equal number of members from both the houses. Now, when it comes to electoral functions, both the houses elect the Prime Minister soon after the general election. The House of Representatives can make and amend electoral laws along with the House of Councillors. It also elects its speaker and deputy speaker in the first session of the House. In terms of constituent functions or amending the constitution, as we have already discussed again, both the houses has more or less equal power. Bill can be introduced in either of the house, and in case of deadlock, the opinion of the House of Representatives will prevail. Now let's come to the judiciary. First, the judiciary is independent of political power. In other words, the judiciary branch is independent of the legislative and executive branch. The Constitution prescribes that all judges shall be independent in the exercise of their conscience and shall be bound only by this Constitution and the laws. The activities of the judges should be bound by the Constitution and the laws of the land and nothing else. Organization of the judiciary. The judicial system in Japan is unitary, with the Supreme Court at the apex. In other words, the Supreme Court is at the highest level of the judicial hierarchy. Below the Supreme Court, there are a number of subordinate courts, including high courts, district courts, family courts, summary courts, in that order. We shall see all this hierarchical order of the judiciary one after another. Now let's begin with the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court is composed of a Chief Justice and such other judges as decided by the Diet. At present, they have 14 judges and a Chief Justice. That means altogether there are 15 judges in the Supreme Court. The seat of the Supreme Court is located at Tokyo, the capital of Japan. The Supreme Court is divided into two benches or two branches, the Grand Bench and the Petty Benches. What is the Grand Bench? For the Grand Bench, or the main bench of the Supreme Court, it is necessary for all the 15 justices to attend when the court reviews the constitutionality of law, executive order, regulation, or government act for the first time. And again, all of them has to present when the court recognizes a law, order, regulation, or government act as unconstitutional, or when the court overrides its own precedents in a similar case. In short, when the Supreme Court is to take important decisions, all the members of the judges should be present in the session. This is what we call the main function of the Grand Bench. Now, when we talk about petty benches, apart from the Grand Bench, there are 3 petty benches in the Supreme Court. Each of the 3 petty benches is composed of 5 justices. The Supreme Court selects law clerks from among judges of lower courts to work for the entire court. Now, can judges of the Supreme Court be removed? Judges shall not be removed except by public impeachment unless judicially declared mentally or physically incompetent to perform official duties. An impeachment court for removing judges may be set up in the Diet by members of both houses. In theory, a Supreme Court justice may also be removed by referendum at the first general election after the justice appointment and every 10 years thereafter, but no justice of the Supreme Court has ever been removed by this method. In short, there are 2 ways of removing Supreme Court judges. First is impeachment. Assets can be removed through impeachment procedure. And the second method is through referendum after the first general election after the justice appointment. For example, assets is appointed this year and general election is conducted next year. So after the general election, that particular judge who is appointed this year will be put to test whether he command the trust of the people or not. However, using this referendum procedure, nobody has ever been removed. At least in theory, there are two ways of removing a judge. One is impeachment and the other is referendum. Tenure of the judges. The judges of the Supreme Court, once appointed, retire at the age of 65 for ordinary judges and 70 for the Supreme Court judges. Now, functions of the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court is the final court of appeals in all cases. It exercises judicial review. It is responsible for nominating judges to lower courts. It decides matters relating to attorneys, internal discipline of the courts, and the administration of judicial affairs. Now let's come to the high courts. At the apex of the judicial system, there is the Supreme Court, and just below it, there are 8 high courts in Japan. These 8 high courts are situated in all the important cities or provinces of the country. The high courts have appellate jurisdiction in both civil cases and criminal cases. In civil cases, they review questions of law and fact, and in criminal cases, they review questions of law. Again, district courts. Below the high courts are 50 district courts. In some of the books, the figure might be different, so don't worry about the figure, because sometimes in some books they give 49 as the figure. But just remember that at the apex we have Supreme Court and then High Court, and below that we have district courts. These district courts provide the venues for most of the trials in general cases. In the next hierarchy, below the district courts, we have family courts. There are 50 family courts or courts of domestic relations below the district courts. They handle family problems and juvenile delinquency cases. The aim of these courts is to promote harmonious relationship within the family and among relatives. Now, summary courts. At the lowest level, there are summary courts in cities, towns, and villages throughout the country. These summary courts have original jurisdiction over minor civilian claims, criminal offenses punishable by fines or other like penalties, minor theft, small thief, and embezzlement, and conciliation proceedings for everyday disputes among citizens. In other words, the lowest court, that is summary courts, tried those original cases which are not very serious, or in other words, which are small cases. Now let's come to the last topic. It's been quite boring now, I think. I'm also getting tired, but we will try to complete the lecture in one class, so we'll continue with it. So we'll take another 5-6 minutes. The last topic for our today's discussion is political parties in Japan. We will move a little bit faster now. The Japanese constitution does not explicitly provide for political parties. Constitution doesn't talk about political parties as in many other countries. But a vigorous multi-party system has been in effect since the start of the constitutional government in the middle of the Meiji era. Of course, there was a short interruptions during World War II. Otherwise, since the middle of the Meiji era, political party has been there in Japan. There is no comprehensive law governing political parties. The Supreme Court has recognized political parties though. According to the Supreme Court, political parties are important organs of parliamentary democracy. In fact, we have to remember that democracy cannot be run smoothly without political parties. Parties that have 5 or more members in the Diet or have won at least 2% of vote are financially supported by the government proportionate to its members in the Diet and the number of votes it won. Now, main features of party system in Japan. First, party system has no mention in the constitution. It is extra-constitutional, or it grows outside the constitution. Second, multiplicity of political parties. Japan has multi-party system. That means there are so many parties. In most of the elections, 5 to 7 or even 8 parties contested the election, or there are about 5, 6 or 7 major political parties in Japan. In other words, there is multi-party system in Japan, and they also often suffer the evils of having multi-party system. Splits and merger. Splits and merger is a regular feature in Japan's party system. Even members who split the party have been often readmitted in their parties. This is very similar to that of India. In India also we have multi-party system, and there are many politicians who will keep jumping from one political party to another. And even in Japan also, splitting political party, merging political parties, and changing their political colors is very, very common. It is said that political parties in Japan change their labels or colors with the greatest of ease and without changing their policies. Fourth, long single party rule. In spite of having a multi-party system, Japan has been dominated by one political party, that is the Liberal Democratic Party. Of course, in some situation, other political parties form the government, but in most of the situation, it is the Liberal Democratic Party that form the government. Absence of mass-based. Political parties in Japan are not mass-based organizations. In other words, political parties are largely associations of professional politicians and administrators who center their activities in Tokyo. Political leaders or politicians are mostly drawn from professional politicians and retired administrators or business walas or people of influence who hardly have connection with their local people or constituency people, but rather who focus more on the power politics at the capital, Tokyo. Bureaucratization. There has been steady influx of bureaucrats and officers in the Japanese political systems and the Diet. More and more bureaucrats or more and more officers have entered into politics and have become members of the Diet. The result is that the Japanese political parties have undergone a kind of bureaucratization because more and more bureaucrats or more and more officers have become members of the political parties. And it is said that in some of the government, around half of the cabinet members were drawn from formal officers or formal bureaucrats. Role of religion. Here, for a very long time, Japanese political parties were free from religion. There was complete secularization of party politics. In other words, politicians did not use religion for political gains or to get votes. But in the past few decades, particularly with the formation of Komeito Party, the political arm of Soka Gakkai, a Buddhist military organization, This had opened a new era in the party system. In other words, with the formation of a Buddhist religion-based Komeito party, slowly religion is entering into party politics in Japan. As of now, they are not able to have a strong foothold in the politics. I mean, they are not able to hold uh, the government. But it is said that this kind of religion-based political parties have been increasing in Japan. Localism. In many instances, the principles and programs of political parties do not determine the choice of voters for a candidate. Rather, voters are more influenced by the candidate of or the local issues. They are not much influenced by the principles and programs or policies of the political party at the center, but the policies and programs or the personality of the candidate. In other words, there is localism in the choice of candidate. Thank you so much. Thank you for bearing with me. I have just finished one unit in one class. It's amazing. I'm getting pretty tired. So let me remind you once again, since we have been trying to cover up the syllabus and also try to recoup the loss of the last week due to electricity and poor internet connectivity, we are trying to complete the whole unit in one class. So it has been very long. I hope you understand. If you cannot watch in one go, you can watch according to your convenience. I hope you learned something, though it is quite boring. So this will be the end of our lecture for this unit. Take care, stay safe, till we meet again in the next class.